bona fide Canadian comedy icon.
Hey,
there he is, Eugene Levy.
wow, hello, Tom.
Pleasure to have you here this morning.
It's great to be here.
And
great to be here.
Congrats on season 3.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
You created the show with your son, Dan.
Yeah.
And you wanted to make a show that both of you wanted to watch. There's a 37-year age gap between you guys. We did the math. What makes it work?
Well, we started out with this thing. He came to me with an idea years and years and years ago. Seems now years and years and years ago, for a show. But he the sensibility of the show that he wanted was the kind of comic sensibility that was kind of reflected in the films that I did with Chris Guest. The 4 films.
Yeah.
Only 4. So that was great. So in that sense, we were kind of simpatico with the kind of comedy style, because that's in terms of style of comedy, that's what I've been doing. Kind of create a character comedy as a base, where comedy comes through character. That's what he was thinking of for this idea. And so we started working on that together, and we didn't get too far into it before I realized that he's really got a knack for writing, as much as I thought I would have to mentor him for a stretch.
Yeah.
I didn't really have to do that, because he really knew what he wanted, and he's very decisive. He's very black and white. It was really great. So
it must have been very surprising. It must have made you very proud.
Well, it did, and it does. I mean, I honestly can't listen. Dan was on MTV here in Canada for about 6-7 years,
something like that,
maybe 8, and did an incredible job on that show. Kind of winging it live on camera, and then getting involved in comedy sketches, and his stuff was really funny. But this was a different animal, doing a weekly half-hour story show. And in the beginning, I honestly didn't know whether he would have the acting chops to sustain a character, to sustain a character that, again, being a character comedy, a character that the audience would be able to have an emotional involvement with. Those are tall orders.
You were a little cautious. You were a little nervous.
I was a little cautious, but I trusted him. I had confidence in him. But right out of the gate, he came through with a character and a performance that just stunned me. And he's way ahead of the game. He does. I just kind of back off and just let him do his thing. Stay out of his way.
And last year, you guys both were nominated for the Canadian Screen Award in the same category, son and dad up against one another.
Yes, and guess who won?
Guess who won?
Yeah.
I believe you won.
That's right. It means I'm so much better than he is, doesn't it?
That's how we quantify these things. It is, sure, through awards and only awards.
It means I'm a much better actor than my son, and I let him know that.
Yeah. You looked him right in the eye.
I looked him right in the eye. One eye crossed, incidentally. No, it was pretty good. Listen, we can't. We our first year on the show just could not have gone any better. I mean, awards aside, I mean that's always great, but it is kind of a if you're garnering that many nominations for a show, it's whoa. That's people must like it, and that's been great. And each year, last year, I thought the writing and creatively the show kind of moved in a very positive direction once you get the kind of the first year glitches out of the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because, I mean, so season 3, now you mentioned that, season 1 could not have gone any better. You're now into season 3. There comes a point where, say with the Beverly Hillbillies, there's that point where you understand that they're rich and they used to be poor. Now they're rich. They live in Beverly Hills, and it's a matter of what you do with it. When you get the Flintstones, we understand that they live in olden times.
Yes.
I don't know.
I like that.
That's how I described it. Yeah, they wore waistcoats.
I still say cloakroom.
Oh, do you really?
Yes,
Yeah,
okay, anyway.
I say parlor, and there's an alien, in the Flintstones. How do you keep a show like this, which has a very, I mean, when you first read about it, once rich family, now moving back. How do you keep it fresh 3, 4, 5 seasons in?
Well, I mean, the fish out of water aspect of the story kind of starts to take a back seat in a way. It never goes away because that is still, in essence, what the show is about. But the show really is about the family, this family coming together as a family when they weren't really functioning as a family when they had money. They all had separate lives, and money was the Band-Aid that solved every problem. Just give money. So now we're in 2 rooms in a motel for the first time. And so really at the core of it, that's what the show is about. It's about this family coming together as a family. So, and again, going into like season 3 now, once you get the fish out of water aspect, to take a back seat a little bit, you can focus on and have much more fun discovering who these people are and relationships that they're having with each other and with other people, in the town. So the Rose family is still in the back of their minds trying to get out. That's what Johnny Rose, the dad, is still feeling his responsibility for his family to try and figure out a way of getting them out of this town and this predicament that they're in. But the realization is it ain't going to be that easy. That however they figure this thing out, it's probably going to be done right here where they're living, and trying to create some kind of business, trying to create some kind of financial stockpile of money that could get them back into another life.
Right.
That's what their focus is. They're focusing much more on where they are now and less on where they used to be.
Right. And speaking of where people were now and are now and where they used to be, you've had this long, storied career in comedy. It was a good segue, by the way. Did you catch that?
I like that.
Thank you very much.
So far, so good.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're keeping score.
Okay. Keep the questions easy now.
Yeah.
Nothing.
No math.
Nothing too hard.
3 seasons on a Canadian comedy is excellent. A Canadian television comedy. You were around in some of the early days of Canadian comedy. I'm speaking mainly about the SCTV days. Eugene Levy, what are the biggest changes you've seen from your early days starting out in comedy in Canada to now?
In terms of comedy, you mean?
Just in terms of the scene, in terms of comedy, what have you noticed as a change from your early days to now?
Well, we outside of just being older, it affects how you see just about everything.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, back in the day, we had a lot. When I started here in Toronto, it was so exciting. The scene in Toronto was also exciting because there was a lot of talent that kind of started at the same time and came out of this city at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, myself and Marty Short, we actually, came out of McMaster together. Old friends. And, John Candy was starting. Danny Aykroyd was starting. Catherine O'Hara.
Paul Schaefer?
Paul Schaefer I had worked with in Godspell before I even got into Second City. I mean, it was, comedically speaking, there was a lot of comedy in the Toronto production of Godspell. Marty and myself, Paul, yes, was our musical director, Gilda Radner, Andrea Martin. So we kind of we developed comedy chops in a very successful kind of way here in Toronto in a show that was really popular. We finished Godspell and then Second City started in Toronto, and we got into Second City. I mean, for us, the comedically speaking, we were lucky in that there happened to be big American productions that just happened to land in Toronto at the time that we were there.
Yeah.
And we were able to kind of make it into these shows. When Marty and I made it into Godspell, it was like we couldn't believe
Right.
that two kids from Hamilton actually made this thing. There must have been 500-600 people auditioning. And then Second City opened in Toronto, coming from Chicago, opening a Toronto theater. And we got into Second City, and where I met John Candy and Dan Aykroyd and Joe Flaherty and, a bunch of great people. And Second City really, comedically speaking, was where we realized what comedy was. It was the guidepost for me in terms of what is good comedy. There were great comedy rules that came down in the Second City theater, the Second City School, I call it, that stay with you throughout your career. Simple little things
Like what?
like always perform at the top of your intelligence level. Something you wouldn't think you have to think about, but you do when you think about it. In other words, don't come up short. Think it through. Even no matter how cheap the comedy is that you're doing, make it smart. Lean on the smarter end of things. And the Second City Theater was an amazing review to be in, let alone to see. And over the past, let me see, when did it open in Toronto? 1973, 1974 at the old Fire Hall. So it's been 30, 40 years that show has been running in Toronto, one review after another, and there's a reason for that, because the material's smart. So we were lucky to have that as a training ground, and out of the Second City Theater, of course, came SCTV, an extension of Second City Television. So, I mean, to get back to your question, how has it changed? How has it changed? I don't know whether it has changed in my eyes, but the older you get, it just maybe it has something to do with the execution of the comedy, how you execute, whether you're just more relaxed now in terms of everything than you were when you were younger, where you felt you had to work hard and put in a lot of energy, and now it seems you don't necessarily have to put in the same amount of energy. It's not you're not cutting down the number of hours you're working, just the intensity with which you're working.
But those rules, like performing at the top of your intelligence, they seem that the rules you learned in the early days of Second City, they seem to be. We're talking about how things change, but they seem to be the constant as well in Canadian comedy.
Well, I mean, I would think so. I mean, I even before I started doing this professionally, I remember early shows going back. I think on CBC, Nightcap was a late night satirical show. Billy Van, No. You don't know Billy Van?
I'll have to check it out.
Check it out.
I will.
One of the early comedy greats on Canadian television. But it was a really smart, funny, satirical show that really kind of, tickled your taste buds, comedically speaking. Kind of got me more interested in comedy and thinking about comedy. And I'd love to be one of those guys. I'd love to be on a show like that.
I think there's a lot of people who are watching Schitt's Creek and are excited that there's comedy in Canada coming out of Canada that's actually very, very funny. That's still funny and it is quite a funny show. Eugene Levy, thank you so much for coming into the studio this morning and making your way down here.
Well, my pleasure, Tom. It was great. It's nice to be on the air with you and